All right, hello. Welcome to 5680 lab tutorial. This tutorial is going to be for lab 1. We're going to go over the basics of setting up the Tormach CNC machines, as well as taking our material, setting it into the vise, and fly cutting the top face and the sides. So the first thing we're going to want to do when we come up to a machine is turn the machine on. On the right hand side of the machine there is a red knob that should be vertical. We want to push it in and twist it clockwise, pushing it away from us. That turns the machine main power on. Next thing we want to do is twist the e-stop gently, and it'll pop out at us. We're going to twist it clockwise to release the e-stop. We're going to go ahead and hit the start button. The machine light should turn red, and the machine should begin to power up. The last thing we're going to do is flip the computer switch to the on position, and that will then give our computer screen or our computer power and start to boot up our computer. These machines do take a few minutes to boot up, so while those are booting up, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to load a tool into the machine. On the right hand side here there is a black latch. You can push it with your thumb away from you, and that will open the upper cover. The next thing we want to do is to lock our spindle in place so we can tighten and loosen the drawbar. So this is the drawbar here. This is part of the spindle below it. There's two flats that are machined here. What we want to do is take this black bar and flip that down so it's lined up with our flats, and now our spindle cannot move and everything is locked in nice and tight. We're going to select a tool that we're going to use. The first thing that we're going to be using, the first operation, is fly cutting. We're going to fly cut the top of our blocks. So we're going to take the Tormach fly cutter, and we're going to load that into the machine. So we will take our protective glass and just put that to the side here. The drawbar up top has a 13 millimeter wrench. These are in the toolboxes here. I've laid everything out so it's easy for me to find. So we'll take our 13 millimeter wrench, and for loading a tool into Tormach, we want to take our tool and insert it into the spindle. Push the tool all the way up until it is completely flat with the top of the spindle. You do not want to leave tools hanging down like this. Any tool that'll have an offset or anything later that it's not all the way tight to the spindle will actually cause a problem. So we want to make sure our tool is all the way up until it's touching the top of the spindle, and then we're going to come up to the top. We can tighten our drawbar a few turns with our hand to get it snug, and then we will take our wrench and tighten down the drawbar so it's nice and tight. Our tool is held tight in our spindle, and while we're tightening and loosening a tool, we always want to have one hand on the tool until the drawbar is completely tight. That keeps the tool from falling out and either damaging the tool by falling out and hitting the table, or damaging your work by falling out and hitting the top of your work and damaging it. So always have one hand on the tool when you're loosening and tightening the drawbar anytime you're doing a tool change. So now that that's done, we can flip up this black arm here, and we can close our lid. To close the lid, we will push it forward to catch on the latch, and then just push it down to lock the lid in place. Now that our machine's set up, this is the main Tormach screen. This is where you'll do all of your commands from, and setting all of your zeros and looking at where everything is positionally. The first step you want to do when the machine boots up, before you do anything else, no matter what, is you always want to hit this reset button. This button will be flashing light and blue, so try to let you know that's the first thing you have to do. So we're going to click the e-stop button with the mouse. The reset button with the mouse. The computer light will then illuminate, and you'll hear a click from the computer, and we know that the machine's ready to go. So click that reset button first. Next thing you want to do, again, before you do anything else on the machine, is reference your coordinate system. So we're going to reference our X, reference our Y, and reference our Z coordinates. And you can see here the table's going to move. It's going to move until its absolute positions to its limit switch. And this gives the machine, it tells the machine where it's at in space, so it knows where its absolute coordinates are. Once those are properly referenced, you'll see that there is a green reference, or the green dot next to the ref has illuminated, so we know that they're actually properly referenced, and we can go ahead and start to move our table. We can ignore the A that is not used on these machines, so we can just ignore anything for the reference A and all of that stuff. So just focus on the X, Y, and Z. So now, next thing we're going to want to do is load our work into the vise. So we're going to take our block here. Because we are going to fly cut the top of this as well as face one of the sides, we're actually going to leave some overhang on the block. That way we can hit the side with our end mill. So we have to do less changes with our material. So we're going to tighten the vise up. There is a vise wrench here. This engages in the front. And we're going to have one hand pushing down on the block, and also I'm pushing back against the back side of the vise. So I'm pushing down and back at the same time. And we're going to snug up our work. What we're going to want to do is check to make sure that our parallels are nice and snug. So this one's okay. It's a little bit loose. So I'm going to loosen my vise just a hair. And I'm actually going to hit the top of my work. Just give it a little tap. And that helps to tighten up our parallels. That ensures that our work is nice and tight on our parallels. So I'm just checking with my thumb here. I'm not pushing super hard. I'm just making sure that they're not going to slip out really easily, and that way we know that our block is rested perfectly on our parallel. So now I can go ahead and tighten the vise back up. My work is nice and tight. One thing you have to be really careful with Ren Shape is it is very, very soft. It's very easy to over tighten. You will actually push the vise into the Ren block. You can actually cause indentations, or in severe cases you can actually crack the Ren. So be very careful when you're tightening up Ren Shape. It does not take a lot to tighten up, and we do not want you guys to crack it or indent it. So now that is the work is tightened into my vise, we're going to go ahead and move the Tormach to the appropriate position. So the arrow keys move the table, so in the X and Y directions. The left and right keys move our machine left to right in the X. So currently I'm jogging my machine back and forth with my arrow keys. The movement is a little counterintuitive. You are always moving in relation to the spindle, not relation to the table. So you're moving in relation to the spindle to the work. So right now, if I push the right hand key, the table's physically moving left, but I'm actually moving my spindle right in relation to my part. Same with the up and down arrows. So I'm actually moving the spindle down toward my part here. And then the page up and page down is what moves in our Z direction. There is an alternate way to move the Tormachs. You can use the paddles that are provided. You have the X, Y, and Z buttons that you can push, and that'll move those in any given direction. The outer ring of the paddle is a momentary switch, and the harder you spin it, the faster the bed will move, and that's how that moves in that direction. The inner part is a step, so every time I click this one time, it moves one step. What I mean by steps is there's two modes of jogging in the Tormach machines. There is a continuous and there is a step function. So currently the keyboard is set for continuous, so you can see as long as I hold the key, the bed will continue to move. In step mode, which you can select by either pushing the jog button here or simply clicking the steps, you can see this automatically flips over. Now, every time I push the arrow key, it will only move one step. No matter how long I hold the key for, it will only move by that one step increment. The increments can be changed here from 100 thousandths on down. So depending on how tight of a step you want, you can change that, and you can see every time I push this, it'll change by one step increment that I have selected. So what we're going to do next is zero our Z for our first tool to face the top of our block. So we're going to move the tool above our block, and then we're going to go ahead and bring down in the Z direction. What I'm looking for is this to get close, still within a safe distance. I definitely don't want to run this down into the top of my block. So now that I'm a close distance, what I'm going to do is take a piece of scrap paper. I'm going to put it between the tool and the top of the block. And using the step function here, I'm going to step down. Using the page down key, I'm going to step down in the Z direction, and I'm going to fish my paper back and forth. And this will, I'll move my tool down. When I feel the paper start to drag, I know that I'm getting close to the top of my block. So I know that so now I'm very close to the top of my block. There's still a little bit easy to pull the piece of paper out. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the page down one more time. So now with just 2 fingers grabbing on my piece of paper, if I pull on this, it's very, very difficult to pull the paper out, and that's how we know we're at our 0 point. You do not want to go too far. Again, Wren shape is very soft, so actually if I run this too far in the top of my tool, I'll actually put a nice divot into my top of my block. If that does happen, that's okay, but we'll just have to move our tool a little bit because we don't want to re-zero in that same point because it won't be a true 0. So now that I have the top of my block, our paper does have some thickness, so I'm going to go ahead and zero in my Z. That changes all these values to 0, but because my paper has thickness, I'm going to add the thickness of my paper, which is 4 thousandths. So I'm going to do 0.004 and then hit enter key. Anytime you are changing any of your values in the X, Y, or Z direction, or feed rate, RPM, anything like that, you always have to hit the enter key or it will not accept that value. So now we have the thickness of our piece of paper in. We're going to go back to continuous mode. I'm going to hold the page up button to move our tool away from our part to a safe distance. So now we can take our piece of safety glass. We will put it back down. We can turn the spindle lock out to the on position, so that enables our spindle to be able to spin. I'm going to go ahead and move the tool off to one side and move it down to our appropriate height. So we know based on the Lab 1 tutorial, our thickness that we can cut for this is 20 thousandths. So it's a common mistake that people do. You cannot just click on one of these and type in the value. It's not going to move the table to that. It's just going to change the value that it currently is. So please make sure that you guys don't do that. So I'm at 29 thousandths right now, so I'm going to go ahead and change it to step here and move my machine until I am at 20 thousandths. So I'm 20 thousandths below my top right now in my Z direction. What we can then check for is to make sure that my tool is completely clear of the part. We want to make sure that that's the case prior to spin up because we don't want the tool to collide into the part before it's at speed. So now that we've checked those things, we've set our RPM for our fly cutter, which is 2500 RPM. I can select the forward button and we will see our spindle start to spin up. So now that we're at this proper speed, I'm going to use the continuous jog, and using my left and right arrow keys, I'm going to jog across our part to make my fly cut. So holding the left key down, I'm going to jog across my part to make my first fly cut. Once my fly completely clears my block, I can move the fly down, and then I can come back across my part to make my second pass. We're going to continue to do this until our block is faced, and we may have full engagement. With the top of the block, we have a nice flat top. That actually looks pretty good right there, so we're going to go ahead and stop. I'm going to hit the stop up here to turn the machine to the off position just by clicking the stop button here. We can page up to move our spindle away, and we can check the top surface with our micrometer to check our initial height. But that looks pretty good there. We don't want to take too much off our first face. If we have a lot of extra thickness, we can actually take that off the bottom face when we get to there. So I recommend just facing your first 2 sides until they're just nice and clean passes, and then worry about taking any extra thickness off on the backside. Next thing we are going to do is using our end mill. We're going to face one of the sides of the block. So this is a 3/8 4-flute end mill that's provided in the first lab. So we're going to load this into our machine next. So now that I have my end mill, I'm actually going to set this here so it doesn't roll away. We're going to take our collet holder and we're going to pick our appropriate collet size. So I'm going to take this one. So that is proper fit. I'm not forcing it into the collet. It fits nice and smooth. If we try to fit in one of these smaller ones, it's definitely not going to fit. So now that we have the appropriate size, we're just going to go ahead and click that into our holder there. Turning the top of the collet holder upside down, it doesn't fall out. I can see it's nice and flush at the top here. So we'll put this together, give it a few turns to start the threads. You don't want to tighten this too much because you'll actually squeeze the collet down and then you won't be able to fit your end mill in. So now that we have that on there, we're going to slide our end mill in. What we want is the top, probably hard to see, where the flutes stop on the end mill. We want that to be at where the top of the collet is. That gives us the full engagement of our end mill, but we also don't have to worry about excessive run out. If you leave the collet out here, you have to worry about the potential for run out. The longer you leave it out, the more run out you may have. So setting our flutes up to the top of our collet, we can go ahead and tighten this down finger tight. There are flats on the side of the lower part here, so we're just going to line those flats up with the edges of this holder, and I'm just going to slide this into here. I'm going to grab our wrench and come right on here and just tighten down the collet so it's nice and tight. And now we can do a tool change. I'm actually going to leave this in here for a minute until I get this tool out. You never want to set tools down on a flat surface like this. There is a potential that they could roll off, and there's a highly likely if they were to fall face down, you can damage the tool. So either leave the tool back into this holder, or you can leave it here until you're ready for this tool. That way we don't have to worry about it rolling away and damaging the tool. So to take our tool out, I'm just going to open our lid up. This is not lined up right now, so I'm actually going to spin my spindle so I'm lined up. So if I were to come this way, it would not come down. So I'm just going to spin my spindle. Now I'm lined up. I'm holding my hand with my left hand on the tool. I'm going to hold the tool, and I'm going to take the wrench, loosen the drawbar. Once it's loose, I can just spin it with my fingers. This tool right now is still stuck in here, and you can see as I spin this drawbar, the drawbar is raising up, but the tool's not coming loose. So with just it untwisted a few turns, I'm going to take my mallet and I'm just going to give this a gentle tap. That will allow my tool to come free. Again, holding your hand on the tool to make sure it doesn't come flying out of the spindle and then hitting the vise or hitting the table and or the work that we just faced. So we can put our fly cutter back into our tool holder, and then we're going to go ahead and load our end mill, similar to what we did before. So again, holding the tool all the way up until it's flush with the spindle, holding my left hand on it firmly, tighten the drawbar up with my finger, tighten it down with the wrench. So now that that's nice and tight, we can again remove that and lock our latch up. The speed for our end mill is 3,500 RPM, so I'm going to go ahead and change that. Again, hitting the enter key when I'm done to make sure that it actually takes that value. Otherwise, it may not take it if I just hit 3,500 and then click off. So instead of touching off with the paper like we did for the top surface, we're going to actually just touch off the side of our block with the spindle running. So to do that, I'm going to get my spindle down. So I have the full length of my spindle I can see is going to be engaged with my part. I'm actually going to move that down just a hair. So there. So now I can see the full, my block is entirely covered by the end mill, so I'm good on my height. I can put my safety glass back. Now I'm going to go ahead and start the spindle. So with that in the forward direction, I'm going to just step over very carefully, and I'm going to touch off my block, and this is the X direction. So now I'm going to come in carefully, with a small step over until I can hear my block hit the end mill. So that probably is very, very difficult for you to hear. I'm going to step over one more just so it's a little bit more obvious. So you can barely hear it, but the end mill is making contact with the block, so that's how we know we're zeroed in our X. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the X button, the 0X button to zero in our X direction. I'm going to change back to continuous, and I'm going to move away from our part Be very careful when you're doing this. Make sure you're moving in the right direction, because otherwise you will run into the block. So I'm going to move away from our part. I'm going to stop the spindle so I can show you guys. You can actually see here that I made contact with the spindle, and it actually started to make contact with my part. There is the faint spot here where I was making contact, so that's how I know I was at my 0. So I'm going to start my spindle again. Moving away off the edge of the part completely, like this. I'm going to come over. We know in our for our 3/8 we can take a maximum of 15 thousandths off at a time. So using my step function, I'm going to move this until 15 thousandths. So here's my 15 thousandths pass. I'm going to go ahead and use the continuous function and take my first pass with my end mill. So now that I made my first pass, I can jog over another 15 thousandths. And I can go continuous, and I can just come directly back, make passes in both directions on my block. So I'm going to stop my spindle, and we're going to check our face of our block. Again, this looks pretty good after just a few passes. I can see the entire block has been faced with my end mill. I don't see any parts of it not making contact if we look carefully here. So I'm going to take my block out of my vise to inspect a little bit further. So nice clean face here, nice clean face on the top. So this right hand face and this top face were the faces that we initially faced. So what I'm going to do now to move our block to get ready for our next operation, I'm going to take the top face and I'm going to put it against the parallels, and I'm going to take this back face and put it against the back of the vise. So if my block is in this direction, I'm going to flip it this way. Now my top face that is nice and clean is against the bottom of our parallels. Our back face is going to be against the back of the vise. The back of the vise is always going to be the stationary part, so we know that that's always true in square. And the bottom, same thing. The base of our vise does not move, so we know that that's also a square part of the vise. So that's why we put our bottom face to the bottom, our back face to the back. And we're going to continue these operations in the same exact manner until all 4 sides of our block are squared. Once we're done with all of our operations, we're going to remove our tool, or remove our work from the vise. And once it's properly measured, we'll turn that in. As far as powering down the machine goes, once we're done, we're going to want to take our tool and remove it from the machine. So like we've done a few times now. Again, holding my left hand on the tool the entire time I'm working, hitting it with a hammer to get it loose. And we can go ahead and put this into here for now. We'll close our lid. And then to begin the power off sequence, the first thing that we're going to do is click the exit. It's going to tell us to e-stop the machine before we proceed, so we can just push the e-stop in on the machine. And then we can hit OK. This will begin the power off sequence. In a few seconds you'll see on the screen here that it's acceptable to move power from the machine. So we'll wait for that. So it's now safe to remove power from the computer. So we can flip the computer switch to the off position. And then the last step is just taking our main power switch on the side. We're going to push in a little bit, and then we're going to turn it counterclockwise until it's vertical again. And now we know our machine is completely powered off. You're going to want to vacuum your station to clean up any of the Ren dust or any of the other material that would be left around your station. So everything back here, all of the dust around the vise and around your work area. I do recommend that you actually vacuum your machine before you power it off. That way you can move the bed around and vacuum everything. It's a lot easier to do that before you power off the machine. But once you're done with that, you can return all your tools below. So all of the tools go down here in the cabinet. So we will put all of our wrenches and hammer back into here and return it below our station along with these tools. Once they're broken down, we will return those down to here. And then you can close up your station and get signed off by a TA, and you are done with the first lab. Thanks for watching.